Είμαι ο Θοδωρής, γεννήθηκα εδώ στη Θεσσαλονίκη, είμαι 37 χρονών, γεννήθηκα στα μέσα του 80 και είμαι διακοσμητής εσωτερικών χώρων. Okay, let's switch to English.
Yeah, you will help me for the translation, I mean for the subtitles.
Of course.
And so my first question would be about simply, so you grew up in Greece.
Mm-hmm.
What was it like to grow up in Greece?
Okay. So I was born in Greece in the mid-80s, and it was just at the time where Greece started to be. Greece is a poor country, but it was a poor country with rich people back then. So back then in the mid-80s, late 80s, and especially in the 90s and early 2000s, it was let's say that the middle class was a huge, big chunk of the population. So growing up, I never saw people being poor or struggling, even though I lived maybe in a kind of like protected bubble, but still I felt like everybody around me, at least in the city I was raised, that they were comfortable with money. Everybody had enough money for good education. It wasn't the Greece most people know now after the crisis.
Yeah. So maybe about the crisis, you did experience this change of in the country. How was it?
So when the crisis happened, the crisis started back in 2008, officially. But I think that most Greek people didn't feel it till mid 2010 or till mid 2011. I don't remember. When it happened, when the crisis started to peak here in Greece, I was in the army. So for me, it was personally it was a big change because I didn't saw the whole process. So I went to the army before the crisis, and then by the time I went out, I remember like living. I was in station in Xanthi, that's closer to the Turkish border from here, and then I came back and I saw the whole city center. It was signs for rent, like all apartments. They were for rent, for sale. And I really felt the difference because it was a huge contrast between when I left. I hadn't visited since, and then when I saw what happened, it was huge.
How did you feel at this moment?
I saw people sleeping in the streets for the first like between 2013 and 2015. I saw people sleeping in the streets, and you know it's different when somebody's homeless for years, and when you see a homeless person that wears like branded clothing. It's surreal. It's kind of surreal. You'd see people that you could tell that they were fresh, like being fresh homeless. It was kind of shocking because we heard stories about like Greece being poor and the difficulties that our grandfathers and grandmothers went through, and even some of our parents. But my generation lived very, very comfortably, and it was a huge contrast. You saw people that were like really rich becoming suddenly really poor in just like a matter of 5 years, because they were accustomed to luxury. We have become soft because of all this like affluence that came in the 90s. Of course, most of Greek people didn't know that this money that everybody had was kind of borrowed money from the European Union. They didn't tell us that. So it was a big thing. It was a big contrast, and it started to change lately. Like now, I could say the last 4 years, it feels different. It feels that it's getting better. At least personally, and the people I know, it's much better.
Yeah, and but according you told me earlier that a lot of people you knew actually like left Greece because of the crisis, right?
Yeah, that's true. To be fair, I didn't go to a public school. I went to a private school where they had connections with the US, and that's why most people they chose to go and study in the US. And the people I knew, my classmates were like 33 people. At some point, I remember 30 of the 33 people were somewhere else, which was quite shocking. That wasn't for. This doesn't apply for most schools, but for my school, it was a reality. And this happened basically because imagine that you're 28, you're doing your master's degree, and your plan is that you'll do your master's degree in the US somewhere, then you come back, find a nice job in Greece, and then the crisis happens.
Yeah.
And they basically started calling me when I was in the army, one by one, telling me, you know what, Ted, it doesn't make any sense to come back to Greece.
Yeah.
I spent so much money, our parents spent so much money to give us a good education,
Yeah.
and now we're coming back and we're going to make what, like 400, 500 euro? Because
Yeah.
that was the money people were
Yeah,
earning
yes.
back then. So they said, okay, maybe I should stay here for a couple of years to see I can make some money.
Yeah.
But you know how it is. Then they met a girl, some got married, and
Yeah,
if you
so
live
they
10 years
stayed.
in the States, you can't come back.
They didn't want to come back. So why did you stay in Greece on the side?
I was a special case because I followed in the footsteps of my father.
Yeah.
So I'm an interior designer. My father was an interior designer. So I already had a ready-made job. I didn't have to go do a master's because I already had a job out. I finished my bachelor's, went straight into the job. Then my father retired, and I was already earning enough money to keep me comfortable. I don't have children or I didn't have any expenses. So I chose to stay here.
Okay.
At the time, I thought I was lucky, but there is something weird about, traveling in London or going to the US and having more people, there than the
Yeah.
people, in your own city when you are the one that stayed back home. So it's kind of surreal.
Yeah. Is it when you started to travel this way that you start to use Couchsurfing? Like,
No.
how did you start to use Couchsurfing?
Okay, Couchsurfing is Couchsurfing changed my life.
Yeah.
First, I heard about Couchsurfing from a really trusted old friend from high school. He was always a very smart dude. He liked to travel a lot. At some point, I lost contact with him, and I saw him in a party like it was 2011 or something, and we had to catch up. We went to the tavern where we used to go when we were like 15.
Yeah.
And we started drinking, we started talking about life. He was like, are you happy? Are you happy with your life? And I was like, you know what, no. And he was like, I'm like, what are you doing with your life? Like, why didn't I see you the last 3 years? He's like, I'm traveling the world. And I'm like, how do you have money to do that? Like, I mean, I'm saving up. I want to travel as well, but how do you have the money to do it? He says, you don't need money to travel. I did it with like 3,000. I saw like, I visited 18 countries. And I was like, what? How did you do that? And he said, you don't know about this thing. There's this thing called Couchsurfing. It's a new thing. It started back in 2008, I think. And basically you get hosted by people. You stay at their house for free. And then if they come to your country, you host them back. Of course, when I heard about this, the reaction when somebody tells you about Couchsurfing, everybody freaks out. It's like, stranger people in my house, how do you know it's safe? But if you see the app, you see how it works, you see that people are verified, they give their ID or something. So it's not that dangerous, but so when I first heard it, I was like, okay, this is crazy. I'm not gonna do that. But it was in my mind, and then years later, it was 2017. I had a long relationship, like for 4 years. Then I broke up, and I was kind of lonely, and after you're 30, it's hard to make new friends and reinvent your social circle because everybody's either married or they're too young.
Yeah.
And I needed people. I was working back then a lot, and I needed people to hang around with. And I was like, maybe I'll try this Couchsurfing thing that guy said. So I checked out the website. I filled everything, and then I had to have my first reference because it's weird. You have to have your first reference to get people to come.
Yeah.
After the first guy that came, then people started to come. So after the first reference, people started to come in because at first, when you don't have a reference, it's kind of hard. People don't trust you, they don't know who you are. But after 1 or 2 people start to come, then a lot of people start coming in. You get a lot of requests.
Yeah. And you told me something that you accept almost everyone who sends you a request to.
Well, at first you have to, because you can't be picky when nobody picks you.
Yeah.
But I realized that the most interesting couchsurfers, they are the ones that seem to be the craziest. And I wanted to meet people that I would not meet in my normal life here. And it went really well, like really fast. Like after 5 or 6 people, I started to have a lot of crazy experiences.
Yeah.
People that I would have never met in my normal life here.
Do you have maybe 1 or 2 examples of the craziest people or the most interesting people you met?
Sure, like it's so It varies so much. Like, you meet people from like 18 years old till the oldest one I had was 61 years old. I met a 61-year-old dude. He wasn't satisfied with his life back in England. He said, you know, that's it. I'm going to the forest, in the South American forest. And he lived there with native tribes for 8 years. He wrote a book. His whole life changed. He even became a shaman, like an actual shaman, like recognized from the Peruvian government. Like, really crazy things. Huh? So I met people that were traveling the world for like 8 years straight. I met a French woman. She was living without money for 8 years, without using a card or money, and she looked like nicely dressed. She was not hungry. And I was like, how are you doing this? She was like, let me show you. We went. Next day, she showed me her practice, how she does it, and it was just so simple. She just lives from the kindness of people. We just went to the restaurant across the street.
Yeah.
We asked, like, do you have any stale things that you're going to throw away?
Okay.
They gladly gave it to us. Okay. So you see people living. The main thing is that you see people living in such a different way than what you know and what you think is acceptable. And this forces you to change your mentality. You start to question yourself, like, why am I living the way I am? Probably because everybody around me is doing the same thing. And then you understand that what is normal for you or for your country is not normal in another country. And you're not a prisoner of this. You can choose what kind of life you want, what kind of lifestyle you want to live, and it's never too late. Everybody has their own timing.
Yeah, and you also told me that you traveled after also on your own, experiencing some countries, some culture for months sometimes, right?
Initially, like when I started traveling, I was a young kid. I was traveling with my parents, and you know how parents travel. You know, they book everything in advance. They have their their schedule. Everything has to be like.
Yes.
So you know where you arrive. You know where you're supposed to come back. And it's not that I don't want to seem ungrateful. Like, I've seen many countries, but I always missed what was the main point of traveling, which is what? It's connecting with local people and understanding their mindset and how it differs, and the similarities and differences between their lifestyle and yours. And when you are a tourist, like in a traditional sense, like when you go to Paris, like we were talking yesterday, like what do? Like most people, they go to the Eiffel Tower, they go to the Louvre, they go to a nice bistro, and they're like, I know France. No, you don't know France. You know, you have to go. You have to see people. You have to talk with locals. You have to understand what they live. You have to understand what is the difference between the northern part of the country, the southern part of the country. The hatred between the Parisians and the Marseille people.
And pain chocolat, chocolatine.
You have to like really get into it, and for that to happen, you have to meet local people, and you have to get into their inner circle. And for this, you realize that it's hard to do it when you're on a tight schedule of a week. And most people, when they travel what? For 1 or 2 weeks, because that's what is allowed for when you're working at a bank. You have like what? 1 or 2 weeks every summer. Everybody takes the same weeks. So you don't have enough time. So one problem that arises is like, how can I find the time to travel enough time for the locals of the place that I'm traveling to accept me in their inner circle? Because if you're leaving in 5 days, nobody takes the time, you know. They say, this guy he's a cool guy, but he's leaving in 4 days.
It's not worth it, yes.
So it takes time.
And so do you have like an experience of settling down for a few months?
So after the Couchsurfing and after all these people I met, I started to travel. First I went to Berlin. It was 2019. I always wanted to see Berlin. I heard all these things about the craziness of Berlin and people not judging people, and you can do whatever you want. And I wanted to experience this. So I booked a ticket for the first time without a return ticket. So I went there. I was hosted by a friend that I met like a couple of summers ago. And I had so much, like, I was supposed to stay there for a week. I ended up staying for more than a month. I went at the hippie commune that a friend of a friend knew. They drove outside the city. I stayed there for like a week. Then I came back. I was hosted by another couchsurfer. I stayed there. Then I met another couchsurfer I had hosted before. That was, by the way, he was like in Berlin. I didn't know this. We talked. We connected there. I ended up staying for a month, and it really changed how I see traveling. And then after this, It was Ukraine. I went to Ukraine. I stayed for months.
So what was your experience in Ukraine?
In Ukraine. So in Ukraine, I was always interested to find a place that I can live relatively cheaply compared to most countries in the European Union.
Yeah.
But also I wanted the place to be something closer to our values. There were some other options like India or like some places in Africa, but the cultural shock for me was too big.
Yeah.
And I wanted something that was kind of closer, more practical. So initially it was just this. It was just about the prices and that it was close. But then I met a girl, I fell in love with the girl, and you know how it is when you fall in love with a girl, fall in love with the language, fall in love with the place.
Biggest trap.
So I went, first time I went, I actually wanted to see, is this a place that I could actually live in? So I called all the Ukrainian people I had hosted with Couchsurfing. I started calling to see who is available to host me. And first I had a friend in Kiev, really nice guy. I went there, I stayed for a couple of nights at his place. He showed me around, he explained, we talked a little bit about the mentality of the country, the differences between the Ukrainian people. Ukraine is a very complicated country, it's divided in so many ways. It's divided in age groups. For example, young people and old people in Ukraine, they're totally different because of the Soviet Union thing. The people that were raised in the Soviet Union have such a different mentality compared to the new generation that hasn't seen that. You can still feel it, even in the young generation, because their parents were like this, so you can still feel some of the...
Of course.
But again, and then you have the west side of the country, the east side of the country, it's like two different countries. Like like if you pass that river, the Dnipro river, and then you go on the other side, it feels like, let's say it's closer to Russia. People are more cold, people are harder to get into their inner social circle, they don't smile as much. Again, that's a stereotype, it's not the whole country, but it's a visible difference, you can feel it. Like in places like Odessa, in Kharkiv, in Kiev, people are more business minded because it's the capital in Kiev. And then the minute you go west and you pass Ternopil, Ivano-Frankivsk, Lviv, the Carpathian region, it's a different country. People are warmer. You get that feeling that that's where the Ukrainian civilization, the Ukrainian culture, Ukrainian art, that's where it actually comes from. The Ukrainian. The other part is, I think it's because historically Stalin sent a lot of people there back in the Soviet days, because he saw that Ukraine was like, they had their own culture, their own country. He didn't like that, so he was sending a lot of like military officials, police officers, to station them in that part to mix the population. And you can see this in the names, like if you go to the right part of the country, the east part, the endings of the names are like Ova, like traditional Russian surnames. And then if you go to the middle to the left, it starts to be Enko, like Nikitenko, Kirilenko.
And I guess it is from this part you fell in love, right?
Yeah. And if you go to the totally left side, the name starts to end in Chuk. And even Ak, which is Polish, which, it's like an organic thing. Like while you travel with a train, you feel this difference.
And so, how long did you spend? How long were you in Ukraine?
Totally in Ukraine, I made 2 trips there. Once, the first time I stayed 1.5 months, and the second time I stayed again 1.5 months. But the plan was. I was supposed to stay there forever the second time I went. So I already had my lawyer, Ukrainian lawyer, my realtor. I had found a nice house. I could buy like a 1-bedroom house in Lviv. And then the war happened. So
how did you react when it happened? How was it for you?
I was totally cool, like most Ukrainian people, because I had Ukrainian people around me. Ukrainian people, they're very tough, they're very brave. They're under this kind of threat of war since the Maidan, like for a decade now, and you know, like people are like, yeah, there's gonna be a war tomorrow. And they're drinking espresso in the main square. You know, they're totally cool with it because they've gotten used to it.
Crazy.
So nobody believed that the war was gonna happen. They actually, even one day before, people were kind of like, no, it's not going to happen. It's
Okay,
totally
yeah.
fine.
So they
But
were
then,
really, yeah.
then
not
I saw
believing in
Putin
it.
sign I saw Putin sign that paper
Yeah.
that said like I don't recognize Ukraine to be country or whatever.
Okay.
And then I said, okay, that's pretty bad. And back then my father was in the hospital, so I already was planning to do a short trip back to check on
Greece?
things here.
Yeah.
And I called the embassy, and the embassy in Kiev, the Greek woman I talked to, she said, like, I said, is it safe to stay for a couple of more months? And she's like, are you crazy? Just leave now, like leave yesterday if you can. Like, I'm like, yeah, it's that bad? Just leave now. And I'm like, okay. So I kind of started to really feel it when she said that. So I called the guy I know. I said, like, can you drive me to the border? So he explained to me how to go and how to pass the border. So I went to the border. Then I went to Przemysl, like a little village. That from there you have connections to any place in Poland. And then I went to see friends in Warsaw, and then back to Krakow. Then from Krakow I took a plane and came back to Greece.
Came back to Greece. And after that, the war started, and you had to cancel.
By
all
that
plans.
time, the war was
Yeah.
like full on, and people they were kind of optimistic. They thought that it's going to be 2-3 day operation. They're going to do like a very heavy attack on Kiev, maybe change the government with a puppet or whatever, and it's going to be over. But what's happening now? I think it's going to last for a long time. The way it's going. Because it's a big subject, but there is a big conflict of interest, and the West has betrayed Ukraine as much as Putin. Like we're helping, but not as much as we should. And the people that are able to actually stop the war, they have a conflict of interest because they're making money. You know, the stock market, all these places that people invest, and you know, every day the war goes on, some people are making millions, and some of those people, they are in the higher echelons of power that in Europe.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of complicated. And about helping Ukraine, you did yourself host a few Ukrainians.
I've hosted a lot of Ukrainians, both through Couchsurfing, but also through the main, like there are some websites that you can just give your address and basically you give them their ID, they know who you are, and they can send people here if they need. I send like most of my clothes that I don't wear immediately. I send some money. For the first month I was sending some money. But it doesn't matter, it's not enough. What's happening there is...
I guess it's, yeah. I don't know what to say, to be honest.
It's a complicated issue.
Complicated situation. And the people, the Ukrainian who came to your place, who were they? What was their attitude toward the situation?
It depends on where they live.
Yeah.
So I met people from Kharkiv that their apartment was bombed. Like they showed me pictures with their apartment like being a mess, and they have basically no home now. Like I hosted a girl, her mom is volunteering back home, her home was bombed, but she had a very calm and positive attitude about life. You know, she was smiling, she was like, it's okay, I'm gonna go to travel, see the world, see Greece, see Italy, see what's gonna happen, maybe go back later. Then I hosted a lot of men that were traveling. It was just an accident, they were just traveling abroad, and the war broke, and they knew that if they had to go back, they would go in a terrible situation, so they kept traveling on. So I hosted...
If they went back to Ukraine, they would have to go to the army, right?
Probably go to the army, or something happened to I hosted a guy from Crimea, for example. He was traveling all around the world, he was supposed to go back, and he was like, what am I going to go do now? I had some people that were trying to find a job here, and they were kind of stuck here. Some people that went to Tbilisi in Georgia, and they were supposed to stay there, but they couldn't find a job and they wanted to come here. Some other girls from like I don't remember the name of the city, somewhere in the middle, like in the middle and south in Ukraine. They came here, 2 women, they wanted to find a job in Athens, they didn't succeed, and then they had to go to the Czech Republic because they had some connections that spoke Russian. Also, all sorts of people have hosted, and they're still coming. Like every week or every 10 days, I get a request. Like
you still have requests from people from Ukraine. So
The last one I had was like 5 days ago.
Okay. It's quite a great situation, but it's really impressive the number of people you've been hosting, and that you keep on hosting people.
I love hosting people. If you see my references, they'll
Yeah,
say,
yeah, yeah. I saw it.
this guy is so good. I don't do it because I'm good. I do it because I like the company. I appreciate the company, and I don't like being lonely, and I have free time, and you feel, instead of just going for a beer with a local friend, you can meet somebody from the end of the world. Like next week, there's this woman comes from South Korea. I've never met. I don't know anything about South Korea. Instead of Googling it, I can have a South Korean person tell me how it's like and how he feels.
It's the best way to discover.
It's the best. It's by far the best. And it's so interesting, and I'm never bored. But it takes a certain kind of person to do what I do. I think to host as many people as I do, you have to not care so much about privacy. And I really don't. It's just my character. I'm not trying to do this. I'm not uncomfortable. Because you see some people, after a while they get fed up. They want like their space to feel alone. For me, I don't get that feeling.
Yeah.
I actually feel uncomfortable when I'm alone. So I prefer where people come and go. Okay. It's like having an ever-changing roommate.
Okay, yeah. I like this idea. So maybe, what would you say to, if you met some stranger and you wanted to motivate him to host stranger at his place? What would you tell him? What would you say to him if you wanted to motivate someone to host strangers?
I will tell him my personal story and how it changed my life.
Yeah.
How all stereotypes, before Couchsurfing, I had so many stereotypes, so many preconceived notions about how things should be. And then when you meet people from everywhere and from different walks of life, you start to understand that there is no one proper way of living your life. There is no one. You can do whatever you want. What is stopping you is you. Yeah. There's no law that is stopping you. It's you. Like you, and you see this when you ask a person that is accustomed to a very traditional lifestyle. He does what everybody does around him. When everybody around him does, they have this. They always try to tell you that you can't do that, and you're like, why can't I do that? And then the minute you start talking about it, you see that it's not that you can't do it, it's what they don't want to. They don't really want to. They're like, you can travel like this. Why can I travel like this? How can I travel for more than 2 weeks? You quit your job, you find another job. How can I find money? You'll find another job. It's not the end of the world. But how will I live it? They always give you a
new perspective.
A new, not perspective, a new reason why they can't do it. And they're like, this is only for like people that have enough, a lot of money, or they don't have to work. No, I know people that live with like €2 per day, and they're happier than people here that make €1,000. Like really, really happier.
So I guess you have a lot of life lesson through this. Maybe to end this little interview, maybe do you have some message you would like to share with the world, or some last word you would like to share?
Sure. Try to live your life to the fullest. Don't let other people tell you what you can or you can't do. And most importantly, the easiest way to break a stereotype or break a pattern of thinking is to actually get involved in that. How can I rephrase this? Like, you have to try the things that you have a stereotype against. You have to try them, and then stereotype is gone. Like all these preconceived notions, they're gone.
Well, thank you very much for sharing all of this. This is really always a pleasure to listen to you.
Thank you so much.